Ukraine did something to end Iran's terror. Even the US didn't expect this. While every camera in the world is pointed at the Strait of Hormuz, while every diplomat on the planet is watching Washington and Tehran circle each other in the most dangerous standoff in a generation, something extraordinary has been happening in the shadows of this war. And almost nobody is connecting the dots. Ukraine, a country fighting for its own survival against Russia on the Eastern Front, has quietly opened a second maritime front that is directly targeting the financial lifeline keeping Iran's war machine alive. Not with diplomacy, not with sanctions, not with strongly worded statements at the United Nations, with drones, with precision naval strikes stretching thousands of miles from Ukrainian territory, with a campaign of maritime warfare so audacious, so technically sophisticated, and so strategically significant that even the United States military, with its trillion-dollar defense budget and the most powerful navy on earth, did not fully anticipate what Kiev was capable of doing. And what Ukraine has done in the past several months may end up being one of the most decisive interventions in the entire Iran war, even though Ukraine is not officially a party to it. To understand what Ukraine has actually accomplished and why it matters so profoundly to the Iran conflict specifically, you need to understand how the Shadow Fleet works, because the Shadow Fleet is the hidden engine that has been keeping both Russia and Iran economically alive despite the most comprehensive sanctions regime the Western world has ever attempted to impose. The Shadow Fleet is an armada of more than 1,000 aging, poorly maintained oil tankers operating under opaque ownership structures, shell companies registered in obscure jurisdictions, vessels sailing under flags of countries that have nothing to do with the actual cargo or the actual owners. Ukraine's government oversees a catalog of 1,237 ships operating as part of the Shadow Fleet as of February 2026. These ships use every trick imaginable to avoid detection and interdiction. They disable their transponders, conduct ship-to-ship transfers in international waters far from port authorities, change their names and registration, and broadcast false location signals to confuse tracking systems. They are the circulatory system of the sanctions-busting economy that Russia and Iran have built together. Without the Shadow Fleet, Russian oil cannot reach paying customers in Asia. Without those revenues, Russia cannot fund its war in Ukraine. Without Russian diplomatic protection and economic partnership, Iran's position in the current war against the United States and Israel becomes dramatically more precarious. The Shadow Fleet is not a peripheral issue in this conflict. It is the thread that connects every crisis the world is currently dealing with. Ukraine's security service, the SBU, has been conducting drone strikes targeting Shadow Fleet tankers primarily in the Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea, representing a significant escalation of Kiev's maritime warfare strategy. It started close to home. Ukraine developed and deployed advanced unmanned naval systems, the Sea Baby and Sub-Sea Baby drones, that could carry up to a ton of explosives over distances of 1,500 kilometers. They used these weapons first against the Russian Black Sea Fleet, sinking warships and forcing Russia's naval command to withdraw much of its fleet from exposed positions. Then they turned those same weapons against the Shadow Fleet tankers that were loading Russian oil at Black Sea ports and transiting through the Bosphorus Strait toward buyers in the Mediterranean, Asia, and beyond. In November 2025, Ukraine claimed responsibility for striking Shadow Fleet tankers Kairos and Virat using Sea Baby naval drones equipped with enhanced warheads. The Kairos caught fire and was later stranded off Bulgaria's coast, while the Virat was struck again the following morning in a second attack. Both ships were heading to Russian ports to load crude oil. Both were taken out before they could complete their mission. But what happened in December 2025 represented something fundamentally different, a geographic and strategic leap that shocked maritime security analysts around the world. Ukraine executed its first long-range strike in the Mediterranean Sea, targeting the Oman-flagged Shadow Fleet tanker Chendil, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukrainian territory, in what the SBU described as an unprecedented special operation. Think about what that means operationally. Ukraine launched a drone attack on a ship sailing between Malta and Crete in the middle of the Mediterranean from a country that is simultaneously fighting a full-scale land war against Russia on its own soil. The SBU source who confirmed the operation said that the Kendall had been used by Russia to circumvent sanctions and earn money that funded the war against Ukraine, and that the enemy must understand Ukraine will not stop and will beat them anywhere in the world, wherever they are. That is not the language of a country playing defense. That is the language of a country that has decided to take the fight to the enemy's economic infrastructure, no matter how far away that infrastructure happens to be operating. Putin's response to the Kendall strike came during his annual press conference, where he dismissed the attack as an attempt to raise insurance premiums before vowing that there will always be a response from Russia's side. But the response he promised has not stopped Ukraine's campaign. It has expanded it. In January 2026, another Shadow Fleet tanker was struck near Turkey. In March, the Russian-flagged LNG tanker Arctic Megagas, a massive vessel carrying 62,000 tons of liquefied natural gas, caught fire in the central Mediterranean southeast of Malta after what shipping security analysts assessed was a Ukrainian drone strike. The Arctic Megagas ended up adrift with a severe list, large holes in its side, and massive burn damage across much of the hull. A 164,000-ton ship essentially destroyed in the middle of one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. The scale of that attack and the technical sophistication required to execute it sent a message that resonated through every shipping company, every insurance underwriter, and every government that had been assuming the Shadow Fleet could operate indefinitely without consequence. Now, here is where the Ukraine campaign connects directly to the Iran war in ways that are not being reported with the seriousness they deserve. Zelenskyy revealed that Ukraine is helping 5 countries in the Middle East and Gulf region counter drone attacks on their territory during the Iran war, specifically Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan, providing drone expertise and helping build defensive systems. Ukraine has spent 4 years developing the most advanced practical knowledge of drone warfare of any military on Earth. No country has done more real-world testing, iteration, and operational deployment of unmanned systems in actual combat conditions. And now Kyiv is sharing that knowledge with the Gulf states that have been on the receiving end of Iranian drone strikes since the war began. The same technology that Ukraine used to sink Russian warships in the Black Sea is being adapted to defend Saudi oil facilities, UAE airports, and Qatari military installations from the same Iranian drones that have been terrorizing the region. This is not a minor footnote. This is a fundamental shift in the military balance of the entire conflict. But the connection runs even deeper. The Shadow Fleet that Ukraine has been systematically attacking is not just a Russian operation. It is a shared Russian-Iranian infrastructure. The Trump administration has accused Russia, Iran, and Venezuela of using the global Shadow Fleet to trade oil in defiance of Western sanctions. And the vessels that Ukraine has been targeting include ships that carry both Russian and Iranian crude, often on the same routes to the same buyers using the same deceptive practices. When Ukraine destroys a Shadow Fleet tanker in the Mediterranean, it is not just cutting off Russian revenue. It is degrading the shared logistics network that both Moscow and Tehran depend on to survive economic pressure. Every tanker Ukraine takes out is a tanker that cannot carry Iranian oil to China. Every ship that gets hit raises insurance premiums for every vessel associated with sanctioned cargo, making it more expensive for everyone in the Shadow Fleet ecosystem to operate. Analysts at Windward, a leading maritime consultancy, said that the Shadow Fleet of hundreds of flagless, stateless tankers can no longer operate unchallenged, and that the situation is only going to deteriorate further as Ukraine's campaign continues to expand in both geographic scope and technical sophistication. The United States has watched Ukraine's maritime campaign with a complex mixture of admiration and anxiety. U.S. authorities reportedly used diplomatic backchannels in early 2025 to convey a warning to the Ukrainian government that if Ukraine had any involvement in Shadow Fleet attacks, such operations should be halted immediately. Washington was worried about escalation, about Russia's reaction, about legal complications regarding attacks on ships in international waters, about the broader precedent being set for maritime warfare. But Ukraine did not stop. It escalated. And ironically, by doing so, it has ended up doing something that directly benefits the American war effort against Iran, degrading the financial infrastructure that keeps Tehran economically viable. While Washington's own approach has been limited to the naval blockade of Iranian ports and diplomatic pressure through Pakistani intermediaries, Ukraine went further than America was willing to go. And it worked. Russia's Kremlin showed it was willing to raise the stakes to protect its oil revenues. When U.S. authorities pursued a Russian-flagged tanker, Putin dispatched a submarine and aircraft to escort it, and he described Ukrainian attacks in the Black Sea as piracy and vowed retaliation. But vowing retaliation and actually stopping Ukraine's campaign are two very different things. Russia has not been able to protect its shadow fleet from Ukrainian drones. The Arctic metagas is drifting, disabled in the Mediterranean. The Kendall is inoperable. Multiple other vessels have been damaged or destroyed. Turkish company Besiktas Shipping announced it was ceasing all shipping operations involving Russian interests after its vessel Mersin was damaged by explosions, a commercial decision that speaks volumes about how Ukraine's campaign is reshaping the risk calculus for every company operating in the shadow fleet ecosystem. Meanwhile, the geopolitical ripple effects of Ukraine's intervention are being felt in capitals that are not usually part of the conversation about the Iran war. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said at a meeting with Joint Expeditionary Force allies in Finland that they should go after the shadow fleet even harder, signaling that Ukraine's unilateral campaign has unlocked political will among European allies to take more aggressive action against the tanker network that has been funding both Russia's war in Ukraine and Iran's war against the United States and Israel simultaneously. The UK has announced that its military will board shadow fleet tankers transiting British waters. France seized a sanctioned Russian tanker in January. Sweden has detained shadow fleet vessels and arrested crew members. Europe, emboldened by Ukraine's example, is closing the net around the financial infrastructure of the Russia-Iran axis from multiple directions at once. The strategic significance of what Ukraine has done cannot be overstated. For years, the shadow fleet operated with virtual impunity, 1,000-ship armada sailing through the world's oceans, laundering sanctioned oil, funding authoritarian governments, and laughing at the West's inability or unwillingness to do anything serious about it. Sanctions were imposed on individual ships, but new ships just joined the fleet. Insurance companies refused to cover sanctioned vessels, but the shadow fleet created its own insurance structures. Port authorities were lobbied to look the other way, and many of them did. The sanctions regime that was supposed to starve Russia and Iran of revenue was being systematically circumvented on a massive industrial scale, right in plain sight, and nobody was doing anything about it that actually worked. Ukraine changed that, not with lawyers, not with resolutions, with drones and explosives and the kind of operational creativity that comes from fighting for survival against overwhelming odds for 4 straight years. One security analyst told Haaretz that the Ukrainians are operating under the relative anonymity afforded by commercial shipping, launching unmanned systems from vessels in neutral waters and striking targets that Russia finds very difficult to counter. The same ingenuity that created Operation Spiderweb, which destroyed dozens of Russian strategic bombers on the ground by hiding explosive drones inside shipping containers that Russian truck drivers unknowingly transported to military airfields, is now being applied to the global maritime economy that keeps the Russia-Iran axis financially afloat. And here is the bottom line that every person watching the Iran war needs to understand. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The U.S. naval blockade is in place. Peace talks between Washington and Tehran have collapsed twice and are on uncertain ground. Oil prices are above $100 a barrel. The global economy is absorbing damage that is being felt by ordinary people everywhere. But quietly, in the background, Ukraine has been doing something that no other country has been willing or able to do, physically attacking the financial infrastructure that keeps both Russia and Iran in the fight. Every shadow fleet tanker that Ukraine destroys is less revenue for Moscow and less revenue for Tehran. Every ship that gets hit raises the cost of participating in the sanctions-busting economy that the Russia-Iran axis depends on. Every successful strike expands the precedent and the political permission for other actors, Britain, France, the EU, to take their own more aggressive action against the fleet. The war against Iran's terror network is being fought on multiple fronts simultaneously, at the Strait of Hormuz, at the United Nations, in the skies over Lebanon, in the back channels between Washington and Tehran via Pakistani intermediaries. But one of the most effective fronts, and the one that has received the least attention, is the one being prosecuted by a country that was not even supposed to be part of this conflict, a country fighting its own war for survival on the eastern edge of Europe that has somehow found the resources, the technology, and the strategic vision to strike Iran's lifeline thousands of miles away in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Ukraine did something that even the United States did not fully expect. And in doing so, it may have done more to end Iran's terror than any diplomat, any sanction, or any naval blockade has managed to accomplish so far. If this gave you the full picture that no mainstream outlet is connecting for you, hit subscribe right now because this war is moving on multiple fronts every single day, and I cover every development the moment it breaks. Drop your answer in the comments below. Do you think Ukraine's Shadow Fleet campaign will ultimately force Iran to the negotiating table, or is Russia going to find a way to protect the oil lifeline that keeps Tehran in the fight? Tell me what you think.